Welcome to another episode of Behind the Agency. This week, I'm excited to talk with Jason Hennessey from Hennessey Digital. Thanks for coming on the show.
David, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, we talked a little bit before this, and your story begins with SEO, and you kind of stumbled into building an SEO agency. Before you started that, what did you think running an agency was going to be like?
Yeah, I didn't have any intentions of ever running or owning an agency. Like you mentioned, I accidentally kind of stumbled into it. I was just very deeply passionate about SEO for some of my own projects. I was an entrepreneur. And so I was mostly doing SEO to help with my own business at the time. And I just kind of studied it and got passionate about it. And then I got asked to speak to a group of lawyers back in 2008. This was now 8 years after I've been doing SEO. And along the way, I started to do some SEO in the gaming space. So like online poker, very competitive niches. And so I gave this presentation to a group of lawyers. And by the time I got done with the presentation, I left there with like 7 business cards, which was the genesis of my first agency. And it's like, hey, guess what? You now own an agency and you're working with lawyers. It's like, okay, right? And so it's interesting how life kind of does that. And so I didn't know what I was getting into, and I remember very clearly I used to have dark black hair, no grays. After agency life, like, hey, this is what it is, I guess.
Yeah. Well, so it sounds like, I think when we talked before, you mentioned that the sort of legal angle kind of it kind of chose you. You chose it intentionally. Can you talk a little bit about that whole, maybe you touched on a little bit there with kind of happened with the speaking, but was there any other sort of context for how you ended up focusing in the legal area?
Yeah, so it was clearly like a mastermind group for DUI lawyers. And so there was like 50 lawyers that didn't compete with each other, and they would get together once a year and share some of their industry trade secrets. And so somebody that was in the group knew me, brought me in as a guest speaker. I came up there and I basically said, hey, I don't know anything about how to rank on Google for law firm terms, but this is what I did to rank number 1 on Google for the keyword online poker, which is way more competitive, right? And I just kind of walked them through the things that they should be paying attention to, what link building was, why that mattered, content that they created, like a lot of the same principles that apply today, right? I was kind of sharing with them. Once I left there, I had my first, call it 4 clients. I started to, again, build a team underneath me because I couldn't do everything. And then we started to get good results. Then the lawyers referred us to some of their other colleagues in other markets. And then they started to say, by the way, you should go get a booth at this conference, right? It's a bunch of lawyers that show up at this conference to learn, and you should get a booth there. And it's like, okay. And then just over time, you just start to kind of get into the industry and you start meeting more people and the relationships compound and the case studies get better. And, and next thing you know, you start to build a personal brand in that market. And so now many years later, many decades later, I guess, now a lot of people in the industry know of me. I've wrote books on the subject that are very niche specific. I speak at all the conferences, I'm a thought leader in the space. And so now the personal brand drives most of our leads and revenue for our agency.
Yeah. Well, I would think too, just the fact that you specialize, like you started out, it sounds like, kind of being a generalist, like you knew how to do SEO in general.
That's right.
And you didn't even know how to do necessarily specific stuff for legal.
Yep.
But you knew enough to essentially demonstrate that you were an expert. And then they could see, by how you were explaining it, and actually maybe understanding it themselves, that, oh, this could really apply to what we do. And almost kind of like, once they saw the value of it, it was a lot easier for them to kind of hire you and
justify the cost, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, like, it's like, like later on, I really got lucky. They say that the riches are in the niches, and for me, I just got lucky, right? And it just like, I never had a problem getting more clients. Like, in fact, I didn't even know I was starting an agency, and it's like, here's 4 clients. Like, oh my God, here's another 4, oh my God, right? It's just kind of grew that way.
Yeah.
Whereas if I would have done it differently, how most agencies are started, it's like, hey, we're going to build an agency and we're going to do SEO, right? And it's like, okay, well, in order to pay my mortgage, I need to get a client, and whoever says yes, I'm going to be working with them, right? So we start saying we do SEO, and then you get some e-commerce company that raise their hand, and then you get a plumbing company, and then you get another company that sells, like jet parts or whatever. And it's like, now you're doing SEO for so many different industries. And it's very hard to, at least in my opinion, to scale that, right? Because it's like, okay, 1 minute I'm talking to a plumber, and it's like, I need to understand the vernacular of like, what do their customers think about? What do they type onto Google? It's like, okay, now I'm dealing with like manufacturing company that makes very specific parts for jets. It's like, oh my God, like, I don't even know what they're talking about right now. I got to go figure this out. I got to research it. And then we got to write content for all this stuff too. It's like, so like the beauty about why I'm fortunate is because I run my agency. I hate to say it, but it's like almost like a McDonald's, you know what I mean? It's like, I could put a McDonald's in Dallas, and I know exactly how the hamburgers are made. I know exactly how the customers like it. You put 2 pickles on it, you put a little ketchup, right? And that same model is going to work in Houston, and it's going to work in Los Angeles, right? And so that allowed me to kind of scale a lot quicker.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I tell folks is setting up your agency for scale is really just about like, sure, how to, you could convince somebody who you see face to face to maybe working with you, but at a certain point, it's unsustainable for you to be the person who's, trying to convince all these people. What's better is if you can essentially kind of figure out what you do best and lead with that, like on your website, and double down there.
Yeah, and that's definitely applicable now in terms of like all the different large language models, Like if you go to ChatGPT or one of the other ones, and you type in like, hey, who's a good agency that works with lawyers? Because like I've done years and years of podcasts and books and our content silos on our website, a lot of times like the large language models are referring to us as one of multiple choices, of course, but if we were just kind of diversified and did all things to all people, then I don't know if anybody asked that specific question, like, would we be referenced? So it's actually paying off now, with the future of like SEO and now like search marketing with the large language models too.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the more crowded a space is, the harder it is for like the end consumer to know, like which person to choose from. But if you have clearly said, hey, we're the folks who just work with lawyers, it's like when a lawyer's looking for someone to work with and they need SEO, it's like ding, ding, ding. Like you're the automatic top of the list.
And it's the reason why I titled my book Law Firm SEO, right?
Yeah.
Because when people did a Google search, I knew that it'd be very hard to outrank Amazon. And so if I had Amazon optimize my book for the word law firm SEO, like that was always going to be like on the first page of Google. But again, now it kind of set me up to be, the guy that wrote the book on law firm SEO to all of the entities and large language models, right?
Yeah.
So
you basically applied SEO principles to your book strategy, it sounds like.
Totally. Right? It was keyword research. Yeah.
That's awesome. So, I mean, it sounds like what you said that picking a niche or maybe having the niche chosen for you really kind of unlocked and made a lot of things easier that would have otherwise been more difficult. Really is a lot more difficult for other agencies out there. I guess when you did kind of switch over into legal more formally, did you have to like end up saying no to people who were outside of that? Like what happened when somebody came to you that like was maybe outside of that category?
So I'll answer this in twofold. So the first agency that I started, it was called Everspark Interactive. And so that was like our first entry point into working with lawyers. Budgets range from like, let's just call it $3,000 to like $6,000 per month. And so again, we never really had problems getting new clients, right? We never really had to market ourselves, right? Because again, 4 clients landed on our lap. They referred us to others. Next, we're going to the conferences. Along the way, like somebody might have come in, and be like, hey, Jason, I know you do SEO. Like we might have taken a couple clients that were outside of our niche and along the journey. But again, we weren't really having to market ourselves, right? So like it was just kind of happening naturally. And so, but once I actually sold that agency to my business partner, because you have 2 partners and both have different appetites for risk. And so, I wanted to move faster. He might have slowed us down a little bit or vice versa, right? And so it's just like, hey, why don't we kind of separate? And so then I sold it to him. I then moved to LA. I was in Georgia, moved to LA, took a sabbatical leave. And I'm like, I'm going to start this over again. And if I do this again, like I want to build the Lamborghini of legal marketing, right? And so no more $3,000 packages. You know what I mean? If I'm going to do this, I want to be $15,000 per month. I want to get the best results for our clients. That gives me a bigger budget to do that. And so I don't care if people say no, it's okay. You know what I mean? I'm just going to go find a client that says yes and make that the best case study, and then leverage that case study to go get some of the more, the higher tier personal injury law firms throughout the country that have the bigger budgets. And so that was by design for my next agency. And so I found my first client to pay me $15,000 per month. I leaned all in. I made that the best case study ever. And then I leveraged that case study to go out and basically build that model for other lawyers in different markets. And eventually then I started to kind of get associated with like premium service, right? Like, oh, Jason Hennessey, he's really good, but he's really expensive. You know what I mean? But I was okay with that, and so that was all by design. And to kind of go back to your original question, if people came in, that did different things, a lot of times we were just too expensive anyway. You know what I mean? You're not going to get in most cases, generally speaking, you're not going to get a plumber that has a $15,000 per month budget. You know what I mean? So like we weren't really positioned. In fact, we said no to a lot of lawyers that only had a $6,000 per month budget, just because like we were kind of like setting our agency up to be more premium.
Gotcha. When you, because I feel like this is a question that would come up, is when you go premium, does that mean you end up moving away from that sort of repeatable, scalable McDonald's sort of approach? Or did you find that like those are not mutually exclusive?
No, I mean, like in terms of like building the website and setting up the architecture and the linking, the internal links and the schema and all of that stuff, right? That's like similar, right? Regardless of if the law firm is competing in Los Angeles or if the law firm is competing in Chicago, right? You know what I mean? Like the way in which we build the websites are the same. However, we learn from the mistakes, right? So that's the beauty about working with our agency is we've tested so many different theories and strategies, and we see what works and what doesn't work, so that by the time this law firm wants to work with us 2 years later, it's like, hey, you've already got the benefit of all the mistakes that we've made working with these 4 other attorneys that we've worked with, right? So it just continues to get better and compound. But the difference really with the bigger budget was that we had more power to go out and get better links. We had more power to write more content, right? So that we could really build out topical silos. We were doing digital PR. We were doing outreach to journalists to try to get like natural links coming in from USA Today's of the world and the Wall Street Journals of the world. And those are the links that really are like gold in the world of SEO back in the day. And even today with, like some of the AI overviews and stuff. And so that allowed us to really kind of accelerate the growth. Whereas most agencies were just kind of relying on, publishing a couple of pieces of content and getting some guest blog post links. You know what I mean? Like, so it wasn't really a comparison.
Yeah. So you basically kind of almost reverse engineered. You're like, how would I, if I really wanted to do a really great job for my clients, here's the sort of budget I would need to
Yep.
do that. And it's like, I'm just going to ahead of time say that I'm going to say no to anyone who can't afford that, because I want to be able to deliver at a certain level. And that's going to require a cost at a certain level.
Yeah, our agency could have been way bigger if we just said yes to everybody, but we said no a lot more than we said yes. Just because we wanted to manage expectations, we wanted to preserve our relationship, our reputation in the market. I wanted to preserve my personal brand in the market too. And so, if they didn't have the right budget, we would just tell them no, and we might make a couple of recommendations for other agencies that might be able to help. But we kind of stayed true to that, and that allowed us to scale, in the magnitude that we were comfortable with scaling. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't want to burden the agency by onboarding 100 clients and then playing that game of like just churn. You know what I mean? Like, you got 100 clients, and everybody's paying $1,500 per month, but you lose 30% of them because the man, you know what I mean? It's just a different game, I guess, but that wasn't the game I wanted to play.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it ends up being a little more of a commoditized game, and you wanted to play more of a premium game. And I think that makes a lot of sense. I think it's probably better for like the mental health of you and your team, probably, having fewer premium clients to work with. I had one question around just kind of how you thought about packaging what you're offering. Like, was it something that that evolved as you went? Like you came out, okay, the first batch of law firm clients, we're just going to do this. And then over time, you realized, okay, we need to do this up front, or we need to, have these different tiers. Like, how do you think about sort of packaging what you did?
Yeah. So early on, it was just kind of like, again, I had some experience from my previous agency, right? So I always thought, like, if I was going to do this again, I might allocate more resources to this in the strategy and maybe take away a little bit of this. And, my other agency was in an office with a lot of overhead, right? I was always like, if I'm going to do this again, like, I don't want to limit my talent pool to a 5-mile radius of where I live. You know what I mean? Like, I'd rather kind of be more remote, and then I could save on all that overhead so that money can go towards the product itself too, right? So that was all kind of by design. Recruiting talent from all over the world, again, that was all by design. But then, years later, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, I remember very clearly, I had like one client, the firm, he's a very famous civil rights attorney. His name's Ben Crump. And so Ben Crump, had a team, and he had some financial resources that were kind of getting invested into his firm to kind of really accelerate the growth of his firm. And so the people that we were working with said, hey, assuming that budget is no object, how would we be able to kind of turn Ben Crump into like a national player in terms of like personal injury? You know what I mean? And I'm like, okay, that's a good question. Let me kind of give this some thought. And so I went back and I put together like 3 different proposals. One was kind of like our standard $20,000 per month proposal. Another one was like, really kind of amping it up in terms of like way more content, way more links, way more strategy, 50,000. And another proposal was like north of 100,000. I just kind of threw that out there. I'm just like, it's like $110,000 per month. We're going to write 400 pages of content. This is before there was like any AI to kind of make it easy. You know what I mean? Like, we actually had human writers that would have to write and then edit, and so they're like, okay, let's go. Let's do that third package. And I'm like, oh shit, what did I get myself into? You know what I mean? And it's just like, okay. And so then we had to like really like, okay, we need to kind of hire some more writers. We need to hire more editors. We need, and we put together the strategy, and everything was done in Excel spreadsheets, and we knew exactly the pages that we were going to write and how everything was going to interlink with each other. And we started to execute it. And eventually he started to just really start to accelerate. The strategy started to work. In fact, today, he still benefits from that strategy because he's cited in a lot of the large language models. He's like one of the most cited law firms now because we put that strategy together so many years ago. So again, that's just an example of how we accelerated our pricing to north of $100,000 per month for just one client.
Wow. Well, that's amazing. I like that idea of like essentially building different packages so that like you're kind of giving the option for somebody to step up to a higher tier where
Yep.
maybe you're not even suspecting that they will, but if you make that an option, then, you know, that could lead to upside for your agency, you know,
Yep.
and if you're just leaving that off as an option, then you're, you know, you're not even giving yourself that opportunity to potentially bring that in.
And a lot of my clients, you know what I mean? Like if you think about it, you know, my clients, again, are personal injury law firms. You know, they've got, I would tell this to my clients, they got big egos, they got big budgets, right? They go to law school, they want to win, right? So they're very competitive, right? And there's high margin in their product, right? And so, you know, a lot of times when I'm working with clients, budget's not really an issue. You know, it's more a matter of like, you know, inventory that's available. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, how much more can I get? Like, if you can actually get, you know, me more cases at the average cost per lead and the average cost per signed case below this number, like you got a blank checkbook. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So like, that's usually the world that I live in. And so, you know, that's kind of what we do. You know, it's not uncommon for us to have clients that pay north of $100,000 per month. You know what I mean? Just because they're getting the ROI from it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I wanted to switch gears a little bit. We talked about this previously as well, but and one of the reasons I reached out to you in the first place was that you talked about how you kind of set your business up for acquisition, and you were acquired, and so you got to exit. And I think a lot of agency founders are, you know, will ask themselves that at least at some point in the stage of their journey. They're like, what do I need to do to be able to kind of take this thing that I've built over the time and make it as valuable as possible for an exit?
Yeah.
Can you talk about kind of some of the decisions that you made and like what's worked and maybe what you look at now when you're looking at other agencies?
Yeah. You know, I think, you know, most agencies are started by, you know, an entrepreneur, right? And they see a problem and they come up with a solution, and then they just kind of go all in, and then that's their passion, and the passion kind of continues to grow. And eventually you're kind of like running a lifestyle business. You know what I mean? Like, you're paying, you know, your car out of the company, you're just taking money at will. You know what I mean? It's just kind of like a lifestyle, you know, and that was it for me too. Like, for the first 3 years of running my agency, it was kind of like a lifestyle business, which is fine. You know what I mean? Like, if that's the way you want to kind of grow your agency, there's nothing wrong. You know, in fact, I think I made more money when I was running it as a lifestyle business initially. Right. But then there comes a point where, you know, then you need to figure out, okay, do I really want to make this more of like a scalable asset? And then if you do, then you need to figure out, okay, how do I start to replace myself from other aspects of the business that I'm not that competent in? You know, like when I was running it as a lifestyle business, I was taking care of payroll. I had some bookkeeper on the side that was kind of doing that. You know, like I would have a lot of distractions, like, because an entrepreneur is like, hey, I'm going to start this other venture over here, and that becomes a distraction. I mean, there's all this stuff that kind of happens. And so I brought in a COO, I brought in a CFO, I brought in a CTO. Then we started to build layered management. We started to set OKRs. We started to set goals. We started, you know, and once I started to do that, like, you know, we went from like 3 million to like 8 million in revenue, like within 1 year. We were like Inc. Fastest growing private company. I think we were number 290 on the list of the Inc. 500 at the time. So we really accelerated. But that didn't mean it was all profit. You know what I mean? That was just top line. We took a lot of that money, we invested it into layered management and team and infrastructure and tools and all the things that you needed to scale. And eventually, like, I started to replace myself in every aspect of the business. You know what I mean? Okay, the accounting function, I'm bad at that. That takes energy away from me. Brought in the CFO. She's got that, right? You know, and then just, I got an executive assistant and started to figure out ways to optimize my day a little bit better. And so anyway, So then now it's like, okay, great. Now the business starts to kind of grow without you. You know, we brought in 2 salespeople. I trained them. So now I'm not the only person that's bringing in revenue anymore, right? You know, so there's people that are going out and selling. And eventually it gets to the point where the business just starts to grow. Like if I took a vacation, it's like, okay, maybe there's a couple fires that I got to put out, but the business is still growing while I'm away, right? And so that's what it took. And so for the next 7 years, we just kind of accelerated, you know, so we went to 8 million, then 10 million, then 12 million, then 20 million, you know what I mean? And then, you know, then it's just a balance of like, okay, margin, you know, and while you're in that growth mode, the margins are low, right? And that's by design. You're reinvesting it back into the business. There was a period where my margin was like 7%. It was very uncomfortable. I had to move money, you know, we're a $12 million company and I'm having to like move money from my personal bank account over to the business to cover payroll because there's 3 payroll periods that cycle. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, $12 million company, right? You know, and eventually you get to the point where it's like, okay, great. Now to transition, it's like, okay, now do we want to like exit? Right. And then from there, you have to understand, like, why do I want to exit? Like, are you trying to like exit because you want to go off and sunset and retire and live on the beach? That's one strategy. I'm 48 years old. I've got so much more to give. I got so many ideas to bring to life. I want to make my business better. So for me, I was looking for a financial backer where I can certainly take some chips off the table, but I wanted to push chips back in to something that could be much bigger, still be the CEO of the company, still execute my vision for the company and help to accelerate the growth of something much bigger, right? So when I sold my business, we were probably like 22 million top line with about just under 5 million in EBITDA. Again, took a lot of chips off the table, pushed them some back in. We then since bought 6 other agencies. Now we're probably at 110 million top line with about 30 million in EBITDA, and we're continuing to grow. And eventually we'll get to the point where we bring in another bigger private equity partner to help us accelerate even further and eventually maybe taking us public at some point.
Yeah. Wow. So, I mean, as far as like in that story, sounds like the fact that you specialized in the first place was kind of the first unlock because it allowed you to kind of have a little like more of a steady lead flow, I imagine. And that's honestly probably the biggest thing with a lot of agencies is like, well, if we could solve our pipeline problem, then like we could get out of the day to day, like we could hire somebody to do sales, that sort of thing. So, but I think that's, it sounds like, I mean, going back to what we were talking about at the beginning, that kind of having that niche really helped mitigate that problem right from the get-go.
For sure. Yeah. That was definitely, it's funny, like life is all about the journey and not the destination. You know what I mean? And so, you know, there's definitely luck and chance and fate, you know, there's all that stuff that's kind of involved. You know what I mean? I think you just need to show up and just be curious and be open to kind of receiving what's being thrown at you, you know, and sometimes. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been super fun. Appreciate you coming on the show. For the folks that are interested in like learning more about Hennessey Digital, or maybe just, you know, would like to connect with you and learn more about kind of what you did to kind of to get your company ready for an exit, that sort of stuff, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, I think ironically, I think we first got connected through LinkedIn. You know what I mean? So I'm very active on LinkedIn. You know, one thing about me is I am an open book. I'm very vulnerable with my post. You know, I share things based on my own personal experiences. And so I have made plenty of mistakes in my career and I'm very open about that. And I'll write about the lessons that I've learned. And so LinkedIn would probably be the best place to kind of connect with me. Jason Hennessey, Hennessey. And then Instagram, I post videos, you know, there. And then Facebook is more about like my personal life. If you want to meet my kids and my wife and stuff like that, that's the Facebooks of the world.
Cool. Well, awesome. Thanks so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. And looking forward to hearing about what folks think of this episode. I think it'll be great.
Thank you, David. I appreciate you having me.